that we may hear what the Spirit has to say, and that we might our minds and our hearts to receive the things that you want to speak to us today. And I thank you that we have this opportunity, and just pray, God, that whatever our week has been like so far, whatever our day may have been, I just pray that we'll just set all of that aside and just take this time to reflect on you, reflect on your word, reflect on your greatness, and just rejoice in who you are and what you've done in our life, you are doing right now and will do in the days and weeks and months ahead. So we thank you, and we want to commit this time to you now, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so we are in chapter 30 tonight of Genesis. We're picking up where we left off last week, but just kind of as a refresher, in chapter 29, you want to recall that Jacob had finally made it to Laban's home. He had worked for Laban for a month, and though we're not told this, but I think based on what we're going to be reading tonight, I think it's fair to say that what Jacob had been doing is shepherding the flock of Laban. And after he had worked for him served him for a month, remember Laban said, you shouldn't have to work for free. Tell me what you want as far as a wage. And so Jacob said, I want to marry your daughter, Rachel, and if you'll let me marry her, I'll work for you for 7 years. And of course, we know that when it came time to that consummation of the marriage, that Laban changed up the terms, sent in Leah to take Rachel's place, unbeknownst to Jacob. Jacob becoming the husband to Leah, and then they go through that ordeal. He ends up marrying Rachel as well, and then the back and forth drama. You might remember the kids, and there was competition and all of that. But one of the things I was thinking about in that gracious hand of God in that situation, because it was something that Jacob didn't want, it was something that Rachel didn't want, it was something that Leah didn't want, but it happened. And God allowed it to happen. But think about the blessing that came forth from it. It's not just that through the 4 wives, that Jacob ends up having 11 children, but those 11 children, along with later on, the 12th child becomes the nation of Israel. So even in the midst of that, God was working. And keep in mind, it wasn't like God didn't know what was going to happen. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and he allowed it because he was going to use it. So now we're going to pick up in verse 25 of chapter 30. It says, after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination the Lord has blessed. He added, name your wages, and I will pay them. Now, in looking at this, in the NIV, in the English Standard Version, it uses the word divination. Other translations will use different words, but I think probably divination is a good description of what Laban did, because later on we're going to be reading how that he had household gods, which means that he, in addition to acknowledging the God of Israel, and I don't believe that Laban worshiped the God of Israel. He acknowledged him, and we'll see an example of that at the end of. But he worshiped other gods. And I think he probably prayed and sought, those other gods. And in his mind, his thinking was that those other gods had revealed to him where those blessings were coming from. But again, what I want you to think about, how would you, based on what you've read so far of Laban, how would you describe him as an individual? What kind of individual would you describe Laban as? Opportunist, yeah. Yeah. Somebody who only thinks about himself, right? He didn't really care about his daughters, as we'll see as it goes along. But what's interesting, again, he believes that he has been blessed because of Jacob. And really, I think is that Jacob is the one who's being blessed, okay? Laban is just the beneficiary of that blessing. God is not directly blessing Laban, okay? He's blessing Jacob. And, what's interesting is you might look at that and say, why would God do that? Knowing that that Laban is going to be a beneficiary. And again, when you look at what Laban did to Jacob, and all those years that he's been there working for him, remember, Laban cheated him by swapping out his daughters, right? And I want you to think about what could have been Jacob's attitude towards Laban after, he had finally got to marry Rachel. Because remember, and this was something I was thinking about too. Remember last week I mentioned about we don't know exactly when Laban or Jacob, or when Laban had concocted this plan about swapping out the daughters. And I got to thinking about it. I suspect that it was probably when Jacob said, I'll work for you for 7 years if I can marry your daughter Rachel. And to work that long would convey, because remember it said, chapter 29, how that it was like just a matter of days for Jacob because he had such a love for Rachel. And I suspect that Laban thought, if he's willing to work for me 7 years, when it comes to that 7 years is up, I'll just give him my daughter Leah. He won't know. And Jacob will just be willing to work another 7 years. And so when all of that happened, what kind of mindset would you have expected Jacob to have as he continues to work for Laban? Not what he should, but, from a human perspective, what kind of attitude do you think that one might have? I mean, imagine you're working for an employer who's taking advantage of you. How would you approach your job, your work? Huh? Quit? Okay. Yeah. But let's say that's not an option. Okay. Do the minimum, right? You just do, but is that what Jacob did? No. Jacob worked hard in what he did, and Jacob will talk about this as we go along. But Jacob did that because he was doing his job as unto the Lord, right? He wasn't doing it for Laban. He was doing it for God, and because he was doing it unto God, God blessed him. And because God was blessing him, Laban was a beneficiary of that, if you will. So Laban doesn't want Jacob to leave. Why? Is it because he cares about his daughters? Yeah, it has to do with the money, right? Yeah. He doesn't want to lose out on that, and so he wants him to stay. So in verse 29, Jacob said to him, you know how I've worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you, he asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied, but if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flock and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid me, any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or lamb that is not dark-colored will be considered stolen. Agreed, said Laban. Let it be as you have said. So let's stop here for a second. So from Laban's perspective, who would he consider to be getting the better end of this deal? Okay, himself. But why? What is the issue about the speckled and spotted and dark-colored sheep? So what would that tell you about Laban's sheep as a whole? What color would you say they were, generally speaking? White, okay? And so if the flock that he had was predominantly white and there were some that were speckled and spotted and dark-colored, what does that tell you about how they came to be genetically? How many of you have heard of white Dobermans? Yeah, we have, because we had one at one time. But how do you get a white Doberman when Dobermans are typically black or brown? Yeah, it's a recessive gene, right? And so how do you get spotted and dark-colored sheep when the sheep predominantly are white? A recessive gene. So what is Jacob thinking? Because now we don't know what the percentage is here, but just to throw out a number, let's say that of all the sheep that Laban had, let's say that maybe 5% of the sheep were speckled and spotted and dark colored. All right, just a very small percentage of them. And so what Jacob is saying is, let me go through your flock right now. I'll take all the spotted, speckled, dark-colored sheep, I'll set them apart, and then going forward, every time, the flock, they give birth, whatever's spotted, all of that, I will keep for myself, and you keep the rest. From a human perspective, who seems like to be getting the better deal? Because if the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored are the result of a recessive gene, right, what is the likelihood that you're going to get more of that at a greater amount? The odds aren't good, right? So then you look at it and you go, why would Jacob make this deal? Huh?
Because
He had a plan. But yeah, I mean, that's true. But I want you to go for a moment to chapter 31, and I want you to go to verse 10 for just a second, and then we'll go back to chapter 30. In verse 10, it says, in breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. And the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you have made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. All right, so when Jacob makes this agreement, I believe that God had given Jacob that dream prior to his making this agreement. Now, I'll talk more about that in terms of how all this might have worked. So Laban thinks he's getting the better end of the deal, right? Because he thinks the odds of, these speckled and dark-colored sheep are going to be very limited. Now, it goes on there in verse 32, verse 33, verse 34. It said, agreed, said Laban, let it be as you have said. That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Now, what you want to make note of is that this is Laban doing this. Okay, this is not Jacob. Jacob said, hey, let me go and get all these particular kinds of sheep, and Laban basically says, no, thank you. I will go and get them for you, all right, and take them out. And then in verse 36, it says, then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flock. So why do you think it is that, I mean, look, would you agree that that's a pretty far away to take a 3-day trip, right? So why do you think Laban does this? Okay. So first of all, Jacob then wouldn't be able to take his flock that has those recessive genes in it, right, and mix it with the other ones to increase the odds, if you will. But I also think that Laban did this because he didn't trust. I mean, look, what would be the odds of you sneaking off with 1 or 2 sheep when you have to make a 3-day journey to take them to where your flock is? You're probably not going to do that, right? So would you say it's fair to say that Laban doesn't trust Jacob? Which is kind of funny, isn't it? Because think about the one who was doing all the deceiving to begin with. It was Laban. So verse 37, Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they made it in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. And whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and females and donkeys. All right, so what's this about the branches? How does putting, taking branches of these different trees, peeling strips of the bark so that the wood is exposed and putting them in the trough, how does that result in producing spotted, speckled, and dark-colored sheep? Huh? Was some hoodoo going on there that I mean, did he do it because he believed in some, old wives' tale, for lack of a better term, some kind of, thinking that they had back in that time where if you put these branches in, why does he do this? I mean, did putting the branches in there cause the speckled and spotted and dark-colored sheep to be produced? So why do you think it is that he did this? I mean, there's a reason for him doing it. Okay? If you are familiar with the website Answers in Genesis, I would encourage you to look up what they say about their. Basically, what was conveyed is there are some articles that have been written, scientific articles that convey the possibility that the branches had medicinal aspects to them. So the idea would be is that by putting those branches in the trough, that and of course as they're drinking, and it would be very possible that they would also chew on the branches, that it would cause them to be both healthy as well as maybe more likely to reproduce. So in other words, there is a physical reason for the branches being in there. Not that the branches themselves would dictate what comes out, and I'll explain why I believe that as we go along, but it's thought that there could very well have been some medicinal purposes, to that. Now, again, I don't think Jacob is doing this because of superstition. Remember last week when we looked at where Rachel wanted some of Reuben's mandrakes right? And mandrakes were thought to be an aphrodisiac, right? And so they made a deal. Okay, Leah, you give me some of your mandrakes and you can sleep with Jacob tonight, and then I'll take my turn. And did she get pregnant right away? No. But there was this belief that, if you eat the mandrakes, it'll make it more likely, kind of a thing. So there may have been that thinking in there, but most likely the reason for the branches would be to ensure the health of the sheep, and as well as encourage the reproduction, if you will. Now remember the dream that Jacob had? I believe that what God showed him in that was several things. One, how to recognize the particular sheep that would have that recessive gene in it. I think God would have shown Jacob that there are certain characteristics that you can look at in the animals that will help you to maybe identify which, because even though Laban had taken all the speckled and spotted and separated them out, the recessive gene is still present in the ones that are white, right? And so I think God revealed to Jacob how to recognize the ones that were more likely to produce. I think God also helped Jacob to come and recognize the ones that were healthier and more likely to reproduce. And so let's go on verse 1, chapter 31. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. Think about that for a moment. So did Jacob wrongly take from what Laban had? No. They made an agreement, right? And who do you think, what particular sheep do you think were producing more of? The white or the speckled and spotted and dark colored ones? The dark colored and speckled and spotted ones, right? Which is kind of interesting because, again, if it's a recessive gene, then what would the probably slim, right? And yet, as time goes on, Jacob is getting wealthier and Laban is getting what? He's getting poor, right? And so the sons are angry, and you can understand why the sons would be angry, right? Because when dad goes, who gets the money, so to speak? They do. So they're looking at their inheritance just going by the wayside, and they're upset, and they think Jacob is doing something underhanded. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. Now, again, when Jacob had finished serving his 14 years, you would think that he would want to do what? Leave, right? Why didn't he leave at that time?
He was waiting on the Lord.
Waiting on the Lord. Yeah. He could have said, you know what, I'm done. I realize I'm not going to go back with much other than my wives and children, my family. But man, I'm out of here. I don't trust this guy. But he doesn't go because God didn't say go. So he's waiting to be directed. But would you agree that that's sometimes hard to do, is to wait for the Lord to direct you, right? Especially when you feel like you've been taken advantage of, right? You can't wait to get out there. Like you said, if you were in that kind of a job, you'd quit, right, and move on. And even if God said to stay, we would try to convince ourselves that that's not God, right? I mean, wouldn't we? Our human nature is, no, that can't be God. God surely wouldn't want me to stay. I mean, my life is hard, it's miserable. Surely God wouldn't want me to stay. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flock were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I work for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said The speckled ones will be your wages. Then all the flock gave birth to speckled young. And he said, just then all the flock bore the streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. So do you understand what was happening?
God was avenging.
Well, yeah, but I mean, stop and think about it. And this is why I said that the branches had nothing to do except for maybe medicinal purposes. So basically, when Laban sees that Jacob is getting richer and he's getting poorer, he decides, remember, what did Laban agree to pay Jacob? No. As far as the particular type of sheep that he could have. Right. So when he starts getting wealthier, what does Laban do? Yeah. Okay, I'm changing this up. You can't have the speckled, spotted, and dark colored ones. I'll let you have all the speckled ones. And so what does God do? Makes them all speckled, right? And then, Laban says, okay, I'm going to change it. And he keeps doing it. But every time he changed it, God kept giving. So, yeah, that's a fair way of thinking of, that God was paying the wages. But can you understand that the sheep drinking from the trowel with the white, stripes in it had nothing to do with what actually came out, other than maybe for medicinal purposes, making them healthy? Because there's no way, except for an act of God, that all the sheep would come out speckled, or all the sheep would come out spotted, or all the sheep would come out dark. That's God, right? So God was looking out for him. God knew that this was going to happen. Now somebody had asked the question this morning, when you think of animals that have recessive genes, you tend to think of them as what kind of an animal? So some were asking this morning, why would Jacob want what would seem to be inferior sheep? But were they inferior? No, just because they were a different color didn't make them any less of a sheep. How many of you have seen black sheep? Yeah. Huh? Black pigs, okay. But if you remember in the book of Revelation, in the church of Laodicea, people dressed in what color garment? Not white, black. Where do you think they got the black, the material from? Black sheep, right? And it's known in that region for those black sheep. So it's not like Jacob is choosing to take inferior. It's just that unless you knew that God was going to do this, you wouldn't make the deal that Jacob made, because the odds of the sheep reproducing in any great amount to produce recessive kind of animals are so great that you would never do that. And so, after the first time, I think I would have said, later, dude, you're going to change my wage? If your employer just up and said, I'm changing your wage, I'm going to give you less, what would you do? Would you stay? Probably not, right? You would probably hit the road. But Jacob doesn't go, because he knows that God is in control, right? He knows that God is at work here. And it's like, it doesn't matter what Laban would do, because God was going to supernaturally work. Doesn't that give you a lot of encouragement? When you think about how that people are, there's a lot of people out there that are rotten, that are no good, that will take advantage of you, steal from you, whatever. But God knows what's going on. And he's able to to take what man meant for evil. And I was thinking about this earlier this week. Would you agree that what Laban did was evil? Not evil in the traditional sense of what we think of evil, but it was evil in that it was wrong, right? Remember what Paul said in Romans? God works all things out for good for those who are called according to his purpose and who love him, right? And the scripture also talks about how what man means for evil, God will use for good. And to me, this is a perfect example of this. So he again, and this is dropped down to verse 14, then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. So how did Laban sell them? Think about that for a moment. How did Laban sell his daughters? For the labor. Yeah. I mean, Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, right? Couldn't Laban have just said, okay, let's do it. Right? Remember Laban said, I'd rather you marry her than some stranger. He could have just said, hey, okay, no problem, go ahead and marry her. But he agreed to do it on the basis of Jacob working for him. So do you understand why the daughters felt like that they were sold? And not only that, but he says, but he has used up what was paid for us. Okay, so if the wages was labor, then how did Laban use up what was given to him? I mean, how do you use up labor? I mean, stop and think about it. Was he getting free labor? Yeah. I mean, if all that Jacob, he's not getting paid money, right? So in a sense, it's kind of like free labor. Well, if you're getting free labor and you turn around and sell the sheep, well, guess what? Now you're getting extra money. So somehow he was blowing for how he was doing it. But and then they say, surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. And when Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Why do you think she did that? What possibilities do you think it was that she would have done this?
Maybe because that's who he worshipped, and so she took them deliberately.
Okay. Yeah. So if he was trusting in his household gods, and, you know, I mean, why would she even do that? I mean, if in fact that's, you know, he trusted in those gods, I mean, why would she take them? Huh?
Retain the rights.
Retain the rights, okay. What'd you say? To hurt him. I mean, if you felt like your dad sold you, not gave you away, but sold you, and then remember, all that conflict between the sisters was because of Laban, right? So I think that's probably the real reason is that she probably just wanted to get back at dad. Now, is it possible that also somewhat participated in the worship of those gods? Possibly, but I think it was just to get back at dad. And then it says, moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. You know, I think it's kind of funny because, you know, I think this is an appropriate description. But why do you think Jacob doesn't go and tell him? Why doesn't he want him to know that he is leaving?
Maybe he's trying to stop him.
Okay? Yeah. I think he was afraid. Now, I think in different translations we'll use different words, but I think the word deceived is a good one. And you might say, I thought Jacob was beyond that. Jacob has grown a lot, but, how many of you are perfect? How many of you still do some of the things that you did years ago when you first got saved, right? We still make mistakes.
God told him to leave, so he left. You didn't have to say anything.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's how he spun it too. But verse 20, moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all that he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled, taking his relatives with him. He pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You have deceived me, daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? Do you really think that's how Laban would have sent him off? What would Laban have most likely tried to do? Trick him into staying longer, or even maybe threaten him, if you leave, right? Was this really about Jacob leaving without him being able to say goodbye to his daughters? No. It was like, you're taking off, taking away my wealth, if you will. He says, you didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you. But last night, the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So 2 things I want you to make note of. First of all, he says, but last night, who spoke to him? But notice specifically how he words it. Yeah, not my God, right? Your God said that. And then the other thing there is, he says, I have the power to harm you. Was that true? Think about it. Is that really true?
Well, God could have stopped him, but still, he, in his own mind, would have thought.
Yeah, in his own mind. But the reality is, he didn't have any power to harm Jacob. As a matter of fact, stop and think. Remember when Balaam, was heading off, and what was blocking his way all the time? Huh? An angel, right? And Balaam kept, striking the donkey, and the donkey wouldn't. And the angel said, if he had not stopped, you'd be dead. So God could have stopped Laban and prevented him. So again, in his mind, and that's his, like what you're saying, is in his mind, he thinks he has this power. Now you have gone off because you long to return your father's household, but why did you steal my gods? Would you want to worship a God that somebody could steal? Stop and think about that for a moment. Why would you want to worship gods that somebody could steal? Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live in the presence of our relatives. See for yourself whether there's anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's, the 2 female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel saddle and was sitting on them. And Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. And Rachel said to her father, don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. So he searched but could not find the household gods. Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. What is my crime? He asked Laban. How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the 2 of us. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years. I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would have surely sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. I mean, think about that. I mean, this guy is just really full of himself. You know, it's like you don't even recognize that they're not his. Yet, what can I do today about these daughters of mine or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took the stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. And Laban called it Jagar Sahadath, and Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives beside my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. And Laban also said, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, and then he left and returned home. You know, this gives me great encouragement, you know, to know how great our God is. You know, to realize that no matter what man does, you know, last night we were praying for our country and some of the things that are up before Congress right now and in the Senate. And, you know, it just seems so impossible, you know, that things are going to change because, you know, the majority that is in charge and, you know, and their desires to just ram things through no matter what half the country wants. And you go, it just seems hopeless. But then you read stories like this, and then you are reminded who your God is, and that, you know, our God knew of these things long before. And, you know, I was praying last night, you know, especially with the Equality Act that's coming up, and it's like, you know, God appeared to them in a dream and put the fear of God in them. You know, it's like put the fear of, and I don't mean, you know, a good kind of way. I mean, put the fear like if you do this, you know, something is going to happen. But, you know, things may seem unlikely. And sometimes it can seem like, God, are you even involved in my life? Where are you at? What are you doing? But our God is a gracious and loving God. He's involved in our life. He has power to change things. And even if man does wrong, he can use that to bring about good. And I am so thankful that this is the God that we serve. So let's pray. Father, we do thank you for, you know, the story here between Jacob and Laban. And, you know, sadly, Lord, this is something that I think many Christians over the history of the church, kind of a thing that, you know, many believers have experienced where they've been taken advantage of, maybe even to a certain degree robbed and cheated. And yet, God, you are still the same God today as you were back then. And I thank you that you are so much greater than the things that come our way, and that when man tries to wrong us, or cheat us or steal from us, Lord, you can replace the things that were taken from us, or the things that maybe have been lost to us from whatever means. And I thank you that you're still the same God today as you were in the time of Jacob in his life. So Lord, no matter what we may be facing, no matter what the circumstances we find ourselves dealing with today, I pray that we'll just reflect on the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, and realize that he is our God, and that we can take comfort and know that we can put our trust in you. I pray that we will allow you to lead and guide us each and every day, because, Lord, we will never go wrong in doing that. But thank you again, Lord, for this time that you've given us tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to be in your word. May you go before us now and bless the rest of our week. And we ask this in your precious name. Amen.